The arena roared with noise. Thousands of alien spectators sat high above the battleground, their voices echoing across the open sky. Banners waved in the wind. Metallic drums beat loudly. It was fight day on the planet Dravika. At the center of the arena stood the champion, General Virella, a tall and powerful alien woman with dark silver skin and glowing yellow eyes. She had never lost a single match. Her armor was decorated with the bones of former challengers. She raised her sharp-edged spear and shouted proudly, "He's just a human." The crowd exploded in laughter and cheers. Everyone looked at the other side of the battlefield. A human male stepped forward through the open gate. He wore simple clothes, no armor, no weapons. His hair was short, face calm, eyes focused. He looked small compared to the alien warrior, like a child facing a storm. "Is this some kind of joke?" Virella laughed again, pointing at him. "They send me a human as a challenger?" But the human said nothing. He walked slowly to the middle of the arena, dust rising with each step. His name was never announced. No one knew where he came from. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't bow. He only stopped and stood there, eyes locked on Virella. The announcer floated above in a metal drone. "Begin!" Virella charged without waiting. She ran forward like a wild animal, her spear aimed straight for his chest. The ground shook under her heavy steps, but the human moved, not quickly, not panicked, calmly. He leaned sideways. The spear passed inches from him. Virella skidded to a stop, confused. She turned quickly, but the human had already taken a step back. He didn't attack, he only watched. The crowd went silent. "Try again," she shouted. She swung her spear wide. A heavy attack, deadly. But again, the human ducked easily. The spear sliced the air above his head. A few gasps came from the audience. Virella frowned. She moved faster. Strikes came from left, right, above. But nothing landed. He wasn't faster than her. He was smarter. He read every move before she even made it, and then he touched her. Just a light tap on her back with the edge of his hand. She stumbled forward, confused. "What trick is this?" She growled, regaining her balance. The human didn't answer. She growled and jumped again, this time with both arms swinging. But as she landed, he slid under her, turned, and pressed a single finger against her spine. She fell forward hard, her knees slamming into the sand. Her spear flew out of her hand. The arena was frozen in silence. Virella gasped for air. Her heart raced. She had trained all her life. She had fought giants, beasts, machines. But this was something else. She stood slowly and backed away. Her eyes wide, the human stepped closer. "I am not your enemy," he said softly. His voice was calm, flat, peaceful. Virella hissed. "Then what are you?" He looked around at the crowd. A mirror. Then he turned and walked to the edge of the arena. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't laugh. They just watched. Virella remained on her knees, staring at the dust beneath her. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. "He's just a human." But now those words didn't sound the same. Virella sat in the sand long after the human left the arena. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never felt fear before. Not like this. It wasn't fear of death. It was something deeper. Confusion. Shame. Her pride, once so strong, now cracked, like broken glass. The crowd began to talk again, but their voices were no longer filled with laughter. Whispers spread like wildfire across the stone seats. "Did you see how he moved? He touched her, and she fell." No human fights like that. Some of the elders in the audience had seen many battles. Even they couldn't explain it. No strength, no weapons. Just movement. Perfect, controlled movement. Virella was helped out of the arena by her guards. Her armor was scuffed, her knees scraped, but no real injuries. At least, none on the outside. In her private chamber, she removed her armor and stared at herself in the mirror. She clenched her fists. "I will not be humiliated by a human," she growled. Later that night, she stood before the High Council. Her commanders and advisors watched her silently. "You wish to fight him again?" one of them asked. Virella nodded. "Yes, I was not ready. I underestimated him. This time will be different." "But he did not hurt you," another counselor said. "He simply won." Virella's jaw tightened. "That's why it's worse." The council allowed it. A rematch was announced, and this time, the crowd was larger. Word had spread far beyond Dravika. A human, fighting without armor or weapons, had defeated their strongest warrior without even striking her. In the days before the second match, Virella trained harder than ever. She studied the arena floor, her own movements, and even slowed down, recordings of the fight. But no matter how much she watched, she couldn't understand how he did it. "He sees the fight before it begins," one old trainer said quietly. "He doesn't fight with muscles, he fights with time." Virella didn't believe in such things. Time was time, skill was skill. She had both. The day of the rematch arrived. This time, no one laughed when the human stepped into the arena. He wore the same simple clothing, still no armor, still no weapons, only calm eyes and a quiet presence. Virella entered in full armor, a new weapon in her hands, a twin blade, shorter and faster than her old spear. She nodded once to the human. He nodded back. The announcer's drone hovered once more. "Begin." Virella wasted no time. She spun, ducked, feinted, moved with speed and precision. The human shifted gently with each move, like water around stone. But this time, something changed. He struck, not hard, just a palm against her chest. But it was enough. Her body flew backward, hitting the ground hard. The dust rose. The crowd stood in silence. Virella coughed and sat up. She had been hit. Actually hit. And it felt like her whole chest had been reset. She stood again, angry now. She moved in quickly, blade slicing through the air, but the human ducked, slid forward, and tapped the back of her knee. She fell again. For the second time in her life, and both by the same man, she was on the ground. She gasped, blinking against the sun. The human stepped away, giving her space. "Why don't you finish it?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "Because it's already finished," he replied. The audience began to murmur again. Virella gritted her teeth and stood one last time. "Then I will show you strength." She let out a powerful roar and ran at full speed. But before her blade reached him, he placed 2 fingers on her wrist, twisting slightly. She spun midair and crashed into the sand. Silence. Virella didn't move. The human looked at her, then to the crowd. "You cheer for power," he said softly. "But power without control is nothing." Then he turned and walked away again. Virella blinked up at the sky, breathing hard. Her hand reached toward the crowd, not in victory, but in disbelief. She whispered again, "He's just a human." Virella sat alone in the healing chamber. Cold water dripped from the ceiling. Her back ached and her pride burned more than any wound. The healers had checked her bones. None were broken. Yet she felt like she had been shattered from the inside. Her mind kept going back to the moment when he touched her wrist. Just a slight movement, so small, so fast, and yet it had flipped her through the air like a toy. "Who is he really?" she whispered to herself. That night she couldn't sleep. Instead, she watched every recording of their battles on repeat. Slow motion, frame by frame. She studied every step, every turn, every pause he made. What she saw was not just skill. It was a rhythm, a flow. His movements were not wild or aggressive. They were calm, like wind through trees or water flowing down a hill. His body followed a pattern that made it hard to predict, harder to stop. In the dark, she whispered, "This is not war. This is something else." The next morning, she met with the oldest trainer in their military academy, Master Rujin. He had trained warriors for over 100 years. "I need to understand," she told him. "How does a human defeat me with only his hands?" Rujin nodded slowly. "I've seen something like it before, long ago during the old conflicts." "What is it?" she asked. Earth once had fighting systems not based on size or power, Rujin said. They used movement, balance, redirection. Their purpose wasn't to destroy the enemy, but to let the enemy destroy themselves. Virella frowned. You mean, he lets me lose to myself? In a way, Rujin replied. You strike with strength. He moves with timing. You force control. He flows with awareness. It's a secret art, lost even to many humans now. Then why does he know it? Rujin looked out the window at the rising suns. Some knowledge is passed quietly, hidden from war and pride. Perhaps someone taught him, or perhaps he learned by surviving. Virella was silent. Can you teach me? She finally asked. Rujin chuckled. I can show you the idea, but learning it will take time, humility, and patience. Those were not Virella's strongest skills. Still, she stayed. She began to train from the beginning, learning how to walk again, not with strength, but with awareness. How to breathe with purpose. How to feel the weight of her body shifting with each step. She fell many times. The other warriors mocked her. Our champion has turned soft, they whispered. She dances now instead of fighting. But Virella didn't listen. She remembered the feeling of flying through the air, helpless, not because of a strong strike, but because she had never understood the truth of balance. Weeks passed. She practiced in silence, her eyes focused, her movements slower but more controlled. The more she trained, the more she saw how little she had truly known about herself. And one day she received a message. He has returned. The human had come back to Dravica. Not for war, not for pride, but because he had heard of her training. He waited for her in the central courtyard under the glowing trees. When she approached, he turned to face her. This time she bowed. You came back, she said quietly. You called, he replied, not with words, but through action. She didn't understand at first, but then she realized he had seen her effort, her growth, her change. I want to learn, she said, not just to defeat you, but to understand you. He nodded. Then you are already further than you were before. They stood in silence for a while. Finally, she asked, what is this art called? He looked up at the stars. Earth had many names for it, he said, but you can call it what it truly is, control without violence. The people of Dravica were not used to silence. Their cities were loud, their arenas even louder. But now something strange had taken hold of the world. People were quiet, curious, watching. Virella, once the loudest warrior in the empire, no longer trained in public. She trained in the mountains where the winds spoke more than the soldiers. She listened to her breath. She listened to the weight of her steps. And slowly, something in her heart began to change. The human, still known only as the outsider to most, remained by her side. He didn't speak much. He taught her with motion, not words. If she moved too fast, he showed her how to slow down. If she forced control, he showed her how to let go. She had once mocked him in front of thousands. Now she followed his lead in silence. One morning, she finally asked him, "Why did you choose not to hurt me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped onto the flat stone beside her and demonstrated a slow movement, as if painting the air with his hands. Because pain teaches less than stillness, he said quietly. Virella didn't fully understand, but something about his voice stayed with her. It was the same calm voice that had once made her feel small in the arena. Now it gave her peace. Time passed. One evening, the High Council demanded her presence. "You have not fought in months," one counselor said. "Our enemies believe you have grown weak," another added. "You kneel beside a human. You train, like a monk. Is this what you want to become?" Virella stood before them in simple clothes, no armor, no weapons. "I was once the strongest," she said, "but I did not understand what strength truly was." Some counselors scoffed. "You speak like a student." "I am," she replied. Their voices rose. This is not the Virella we knew. She took a deep breath. No, it's not. She walked out of the chamber without waiting for permission. The guards didn't stop her. Later that night, news reached her. Another challenger had entered the arena. A new warrior, bold and loud, had claimed Virella was no longer worthy of her title. The people were excited again. They wanted blood, not silence. Virella stood at the edge of the mountain cliffs, wind brushing her face. The human walked up beside her. Will you fight? He asked. She didn't answer. They want the old Virella, she finally said. The one who shouted. The one who crushed. Do you want to be her? He asked. She was quiet for a long moment. No. The next morning she entered the arena one last time. She didn't wear armor. She didn't carry a weapon. The crowd gasped when they saw her. The new challenger, a muscular alien with glowing red tattoos, laughed loudly. Look at our fallen champion, he shouted. She doesn't even carry a blade. But Virella didn't speak. The announcer gave the signal. The challenger charged. Dust flew up behind him. Virella moved like water. She didn't block. She didn't strike. She stepped, turned, shifted, and the challenger fell flat on his face. The crowd went quiet. The challenger stood again, angrier. He roared and came faster. Again, she flowed. He missed. He fell. Again. And again. Until finally he stayed on the ground, exhausted and confused. Virella stood over him, breathing gently. She reached out a hand, the same way the human had once done for her. But the challenger slapped it away and stormed off, humiliated. Virella turned to the silent crowd. I once thought strength was about domination, she said. But now I know, it is about balance, about knowing when to fight and when not to. Some still didn't understand. But some did, and, slowly they began to clap, not loudly but with respect. She had fallen from her old place of power, but she had risen to something greater. The wind was soft the next morning. No arena noise, no shouting crowds. Just peace. Virella sat beneath a wide, silver-leaved tree near the mountain ridge. Her body was still, but her mind was full of thoughts. The sound of the last fight echoed in her memory. Not the strikes, not the falls, but the silence, the respect. She closed her eyes and whispered, balance. The human stood nearby, watching the sun rise. He hadn't spoken since her victory, but he had watched every movement, every step she took. His quiet approval meant more to her than the cheers of thousands. She finally turned to him. You knew I would win that way. He looked at her and replied, You stopped trying to win. That's why you did. Virella smiled slightly. Her pride, once sharp and heavy, now felt light. But the world beyond the mountains wasn't silent. News of her battle had traveled far, across planets, across sectors. Other warriors began to arrive at Dravika. They didn't come to fight her. They came to learn. At first, the idea seemed strange. Aliens from different species, different beliefs, sitting in circles, copying the slow movements of hands and feet. Some mocked the soft training. Others left when they realized there would be no weapons, but some stayed. And those who stayed began to change. Virella and the human opened a small training circle outside the city walls. They didn't name it. There were no titles, no uniforms. Just open ground, smooth stones and still hearts. Even soldiers from rival systems began arriving quietly. One warrior from the frozen moon of Kalos bowed deeply and said, I heard she once said, he's just a human. But now, we all want to know what that human knows. Virella laughed softly at the memory. Yes, she answered. And I was wrong. Each evening, after training ended, she and the human would walk along the cliffs. Sometimes they didn't speak. Sometimes they shared stories. One night, she asked him, Why did you come here in the first place? The human looked at the stars. Your people once attacked a small Earth colony, he said. I survived. Most didn't. Virella looked down, ashamed. I didn't come for revenge, he continued. I came because I realized you didn't need more enemies. You needed another way. And you taught it alone? She asked. He nodded. If I can help even one person see differently, it's worth the risk. Varela was quiet for a while. Then you helped more than one. Time passed. The arena was no longer used for blood sport. Instead, it became a place for demonstration, learning, and peace. Where once the crowd screamed for defeat, they now watched in silence as students showed the power of control and movement. Children who once played war games in the streets now copied the slow hand motions of the human. Elder fighters, once feared for destruction, sat in meditation. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was beginning to heal. One day, Varela received a message from the High Council. They invited her to speak. In the grand hall, filled with leaders and old warriors, she stood without armor, no titles, just herself. We were wrong, she said clearly. We believed strength meant crushing others. We thought noise was power. But the greatest strength is not control over others. It's control over the self. One counselor stood. And what do we call this new path? Varela smiled. Humanity. The sea, crowd murmured. And where is the one who brought this path to us? Another asked. Varela looked toward the doors, but the human was gone. He had left quietly that morning, without a word. No goodbye, just the footprints he left behind, and the change he left in them all. Varela stood at the edge of the cliff where the human used to train. The wind was quiet. The ground still held his footprints. She stared at them, as if expecting him to walk back into view at any moment. But he didn't. He had left without saying goodbye. No final lesson. No reason. And yet, something told her. He had already given her everything. In the weeks that followed, life on Dravica continued. But it was not the same. The arenas were no longer places of violence. The schools began teaching not just battle tactics, but balance and stillness. Statues of old war heroes were quietly replaced with simple stone rings, symbols of peace, of flow, of the human way. Varela spent her time teaching, not shouting, not commanding, just teaching. Students from many worlds came to sit in her circle. Some were young, unsure. Others were hardened warriors looking for meaning. Varela treated them all the same. She had learned from the best. And yet even with this new purpose, a part of her felt incomplete. One evening, as the stars filled the sky, she sat before her students. Before I only knew how to fight, she said. I believed fear was power. I believed shouting made me strong. But then, a human came, and with quiet steps he showed me everything I was missing. A student raised his hand. Will he come back? Varela looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. He doesn't need to. The next day she returned to the old arena. The one where she had once mocked him, once fallen into the dust. It was empty now. No crowds, no banners. She stepped into the center of the circle, stood on the same spot where she had first faced him. She closed her eyes, and then she moved. Her hands floated in slow, controlled patterns. Her feet slid across the sand with care. Her breathing was deep, calm, balanced. She was not fighting anyone. She was dancing with memory. Each step told a story. The fall, the silence, the moment when she whispered, "Spare me." But now there was no shame, no pain, only growth. Unknown to her, someone was watching. An old guard stood at the edge of the arena, arms folded. He had watched her rise and fall over the years. He had never believed a human could change their people. But now he nodded. She has become more than a warrior, he whispered. Word began to spread that Varela was practicing alone in the old arena. People came, not to cheer, but to observe. Slowly, the seats filled. No one made noise. No one called her name. They simply watched. Varela opened her eyes, surprised to see them. She paused, but the crowd did not ask her to fight. Instead, a young child from the front row stepped forward, entered the arena, and bowed. Virella knelt down. "Do you wish to learn?" The child nodded. And so, Virella began again. From the very first movement. From balance. From stillness. The crowd continued to watch. Some stood, some sat, but no one moved to leave. One by one, more students stepped into the circle. Warriors, farmers, elders, children, all bowing, all wanting to learn the way the human had brought. That night, the stars above Dravika seemed to shine a little brighter. In her small room later, Virella lit a single candle and placed it before a smooth stone. She had carved one word into it: gratitude. She bowed her head. "Wherever you are," she whispered, "thank you." Because in the end, the human had done what no army could. He had taught them how to change. And Virella, the once proud warrior who mocked him in front of the galaxy, was now the keeper of his gift. The seasons changed on Dravika. Winds grew warmer, and the once bloody arenas turned into peaceful gardens. Where shouts of war once echoed, now only quiet footsteps moved in slow, graceful patterns. Virella stood among her students one morning, helping a small girl correct her balance. "Don't fight your steps," she said gently. "Feel them." The child smiled and tried again. Virella stepped back, watching the new generation grow into something far greater than what she had once been. They weren't soldiers. They were learners, listeners, carriers of peace. Suddenly, one of the outer watchers ran into the field. "A ship," he called, "landing in the West Valley." The students paused. So did Virella. Her heart skipped. She didn't speak. She simply turned and began walking. Her steps were quick, her breath tight with hope. Down the slope, past the stone bridges and the silent rivers, she arrived at the open valley. A small ship, plain, gray, and quiet, sat on the grass. No guards, no weapons. Just one figure standing. Nearby, it was him, the human. Older now. His hair had streaks of gray, his face had more lines. But his eyes were the same, calm, clear, and watching. Virella stopped a few steps away. She didn't speak at first, neither did he. Then she bowed deeply. "You came back." He smiled. "I never left. I just became part of the wind." Looked up, eyes soft. "Everything changed after you left. I saw," he said. "From far away. I knew you would carry it forward." Virella looked down. "But why did you leave without saying anything?" The human took a slow breath. "Because a true teacher knows when to step away. You didn't need me anymore." Virella shook her head. "We always needed you." He walked slowly across the grass, looking at the valley. "You gave them what they truly needed: peace, discipline, balance, not control." A quiet moment passed between them. She asked, "Will you stay this time?" He smiled again, but it was different now. Sadder, wiser. "No, my time here is finished. There are others who need to learn. Worlds still lost in the noise of power." Virella's heart tightened, but she nodded. She understood now. Before he stepped back into his ship, he turned to her one last time. "You were once the storm," he said. "Now, you are the calm after it." She held back her tears. "And you were just a human." He chuckled softly. "That's what you said." The ship's door closed behind him. The engines hummed quietly. No fire, no drama, just a smooth lift into the sky. Virella stood alone in the wind, watching the small ship disappear into the clouds. No crowds saw him off. No monuments were built for him. But in the hearts of the people of Dravika, his legacy had already taken root. That evening, Virella returned to the garden arena. The students waited silently. She raised her hand. "We begin," she said. And they did, moving slowly in circles, breathing in peace, breathing out strength. Above them, The stars began to appear, one of them carrying a quiet ship, and a human, who changed a world not with force but with grace. The warrior who had once lay in the dust and now stood in the light, because he was never just a human. He was the lesson the galaxy didn't know it needed.